So in our microbiology lesson today, we are going to learn about fungi. Under fungi we have listed subtopics which we will explain in more detail. The first on the list is classification. But before we get to that, what are fungi in the first place? Fungi are a group of spore-producing microorganisms which lacks chlorophyll, too, and so relies on decaying organic matter for feeding. There are also eukaryotic organisms, as their cells contains a nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles in contrast to prokaryotic organisms with no membrane-bound organelle. Examples of fungi includes yeast, mushrooms, mold, smuts. These are some of the most common or popular fungi known. Now let's talk about the characteristics of fungi. I mean the properties which distinguishes fungi from other organisms, so that you can through this characteristics identify fungi by yourself without a guide. Number 1. Fungi are non-modal. This means that fungi do not have the ability to move around. Number 2. There lacks chlorophyll, therefore they do not undergo photosynthesis. That means that fungi do not have the ability to produce food by themselves, so they depend on other feeding mechanisms. And in the case of fungi, they mostly feed on decaying organic matter. Number 3. They reproduce by means of spores. Spores are the single-celled reproductive unit of non-flowering plants, bacteria, fungi, and algae. They are hardy and spread through dispersal. They also last for a considerable long time. Number 2. They undergo alternation of generation. Alternation of generation is basically the cycle of sexual and asexual phase in the life of an organism. The last on the list is fungi are heterotrophic. This means that they depend on other organisms for their feeding. This is due to the fact that they do not have chlorophyll. Now let's talk about the classification of fungi. Fungi are classified into different categories which houses specific kinds of fungi. The first category is based on taxonomic hierarchy. This is basically about the arrangement of fungi in order of their biological classification from the lowest to the top. The second category is based route of acquisition, which classifies fungi according to their penetrate their host. This classification mostly used in the medical field to detect or identify fungi, as fungi has different route of acquisition into the body. The third one is based on medical importance. This seek to establish how helpful a fungi is to the medical field, as certain fungi are used for certain medical purposes. The fourth on the list is based on spore production. We have already explained this. And the last on the list is based on virulence, which seek to establish the level of harm a fungi is able to produce on their host. Now we are going to explain these classifications one after the other, providing more details and illustrations for a better understanding of what we are saying. Number 1 on the list of fungi classification is the classification based on taxonomic hierarchy. In this proposed classification, they place the fungi including the slime molds in the kingdom Mycete of the superkingdom Eukaryota. Which, in addition, includes 4 other kingdoms. They divide the kingdom Mycete into 3 divisions, namely Gymnomycota, Mastigomycota, Amastigomycota. We are going to end this classification here, as it is very broad, detailing every single division, subdivisions, class, orders, etc. of fungi. For a better understanding of the taxonomic hierarchy of fungi classification, remember to subscribe to our channel so you will be notified when we post a video detailing only the topic. Now let's talk about the second classification. Classification based on spore production. Now let's talk about classification based on spore production. On the basis of the organization of the vegetative thallus, the morphology of reproductive structures, the way of spores production and particular life cycle involve the kingdom Mycoties. Classified into following divisions: 1. Phycomycetes, 2. Ascomycetes, 3. Basidiomycetes, 4. Deuteromycetes. Now let's explain the 3 divisions of the fungi kingdom. Remember that number 1 is phycomycetes. Now phycomycetes is the simplest type of fungi. It is also known as algae fungi because most of their characteristics are similar to algae. They reproduce asexually by the formation of zoospores or non-motile spores. Sexual reproduction is isogamous or heterogamous, which takes place by gametangial contact. The diploid phase is represented by zygote. Phycomycetes has been classified into subclasses oomycetes and zygomycetes. So here is an image depicting what we just explained. You can see, here is the thallus structure explained as a characteristics of the phycomycetes. You can also see the asexual spores which they use when they reproduce asexually. And you can see the two type of process they undertake when they reproduce sexually as well. So take note that the phycomycetes are able to reproduce sexually and asexually. Sexually by isogamous and heterogamous. And asexually by zoospores or non-motile spores. Now let's talk about the next on the list of fungi classification based on spore production, which are the Ascomycetes. The species of Ascomycetes are called the sac fungi because they produce sexual pores within the sac-like vascus. Ascomycetes are mostly terrestrial, occurring as saprotrophic or parasites. They have well-developed, branched, septate mycelium except yeast. Yeast is a unicellular fungus. Asexually they reproduce by non-motile spores, conidia, oidy or chlamydospores. Meanwhile, sexual reproduction takes place by the fusion of gametangia of opposite mating types. There is absence of motile cells. Examples, Saccharomyces cerevisiae and Penicillium. Always remember to take notes of the similarities and differences. For example, for phycomycete, there are also called algae fungi, but for Ascomycetes, there are called sag fungi. And in similarity, both Ascomycetes and phycomycete are both terrestrial, saprophytic, and parasitic as well. Due to time factor, we are going to jump to classification of fungi based on medical importance so as to shorten the video. Classification based on medically important fungi. Mycoses are classified as superficial, cutaneous, subcutaneous, or systemic, deep infections. Depending on the type and degree of tissue involvement, and the host response to the pathogen. A. Superficial mycoses, or tinnias, occur in the tropics, and are restricted to the outer surface of the hair and skin, e.g., Pyoidryohorty. B. Cutaneous mycoses. There are 3 genera of fungi, Microsporum, Trichophyton, and Epidermophyton, that commonly causes disease in the non-living tissues of skin, hair, or nails/claws of people and animals by growing in a zone just above where the protein keratin is deposited. C. Subcutaneous mycoses. They are normally saprotrophic inhabitants of soil, particularly in tropical and subtropical areas of Africa, India and South America. D. Systemic mycoses are infections that affect the whole body. We divide the mycoses into primary, usually dimorphic, virulent pathogens, and those due to opportunist pathogens. Now let's talk about the next classification, which is the classification based on route of acquisition. Infecting fungi may be either exogenous or endogenous. When classified according to the route of acquisition, a fungal infection may be designated as exogenous or endogenous in origin. If classified as exogenous, an infecting organism may be transmitted by airborne, cutaneous, or percutaneous routes. An endogenously acquired fungal infection may be acquired from colonization or reactivation of a fungus from latent infection. Finally, we are going to end with the last classification, which is the classification based on virulence. Primary pathogens can establish infections in normal hosts. Opportunistic pathogens cause disease in individuals with compromised host defense. Mechanisms. Deep mycoses are caused by primary pathogenic and opportunistic fungal pathogens. Opportunistic fungi causing deep mycosis invade via the respiratory tract, alimentary tract, or intravascular devices. The primary systemic fungal pathogens include Histoplasma capsulatum, Blastomyces dermatitis, and Paracoccidioides brasiliensis. The opportunistic fungal pathogens include Cryptococcus neoformans, Candida, Aspergillus, and Penicillium marnifi.